In today's video, we have lots of NHL trade rumors around the NHL to take a look at. Today, we're looking at teams like the New York Islanders, the Calgary Flames, the Montreal Canadiens, the Vancouver Canucks, and the Los Angeles Kings. Plus, another player is leaving the Islanders to head overseas. A lot more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a bunch of trade rumors I want to take a look at here today. First up, we do have another signing, except this one's another player leaving the NHL and heading overseas. And this is going to be the fifth player connected to the New York Islanders organization to do so this offseason. That's Carson Kuhlman. Never really a big name in the NHL, but certainly been, somebody who's kind of gone up and down between the minors, bounced around a little bit, but, has kind of found a niche in the NHL for short periods of time here, but he signs a one-year deal to head over and play in Liga. Now, he joins players like Ishikov and Salo and Koivula and Ledoux. Already made plans, obviously, for those other four to go overseas already. So certainly a mass exodus of these, I guess you could almost call them kind of somewhat fringe players or prospects to some degree. I know Ishikov was looking for more of an opportunity for sure. Never really found it. Did well in the American Hockey League. Salo had limited opportunity when they ran into injuries. And I think like a lot of these guys, Koivula, you could probably throw him in there too. This, when they don't get their chances and they feel like their opportunity is not going to present itself to get a bigger role, they're not going to stick around forever, and it's just that simple. Some of these players, obviously, maybe just aren't cut out for the NHL, and some of them just obviously for whatever reason didn't work out with this particular team. So you never know. You could see some of these guys resurface here down the road. Now, speaking of the Islanders, we'll start the trade rumors part of the video with them. I'm going to take a look at an article from the Hockey News and author Stefan Rosner, who talks about an option for the Islanders to create some cap space in order to maybe look at making some upgrades to the roster. Now, we've heard a lot about a couple of players and a couple of veteran players specifically around the Islanders throughout the entire offseason, mostly from the fan base, a little bit from local reporters, about how they can go about kind of changing the roster, moving at least one veteran out, creating some cap space. And the main two guys we've heard mentioned are Jean-Gabriel Pageau and Captain Anders Lee. Now, Pageau has been a player who's, I wouldn't say he's drastically underperformed his contract, because in all honesty, when they signed him to that 5x5 contract after acquiring him from the Ottawa Senators, if you look at his play and his production, it's not like it's completely fallen off the map or dipped down drastically, but it has gone down to some degree for sure. And they would most likely need to eat money to make that kind of move. I'm sure at the very least that move was likely explored. Now, one thing, he has in the past had good chemistry with Anthony Duclair, who is now a member of the New York Islanders. I do wonder if Patrick Wall might play those two guys together, and maybe Duclair might kind of help prop Pageau's game up, and maybe we'll see better production. Of course, when we get to the 2024 NHL draft and Captain Anders Lee was at the Islanders table with Lou Lamoriello, it was like, okay, if they were planning on buying this guy out or doing a cost-cutting move to trade him away, I am pretty sure they wouldn't have him at the draft table. So it was like that rumor or that thought pretty much went to rest in my mind, at least, as soon as the first round of the draft started and I seen him there with the club. I mean, they're not going to do that, right? I mean, that would just kind of be cruel and an unusual punishment. But, it looks like at this point that they've moved on from Matt Martin and Cal Clutterbuck. At this point, neither player has re-signed. And based on the roster construction and other moves we've seen, it looks like they won't be back. Now, at the same time, I will caution you, Lou Lamoriello has had side deals with players kind of tucked in his top drawer and hauled them out in September once he figured out a way to make it work from a cap perspective. Like, they had agreements in place, just never filed them with the league because of the cap situation. Now, I don't know that he has that. I have no reason to believe he does. I'm just cautioning you that Lou Lamoriello is a very secretive man, not much news leaks out of the Islanders organization. And even though Stefan Rosner covers the team and obviously writes and kind of has his own thoughts about what they should do, a lot of what he's going to talk about in his articles is not necessarily leaked information he's got from some sources. Maybe at times, but not a lot. There's not much gets out of that group. So, but his article here kind of proposes a different approach because Pageau and Lee don't appear to be going anywhere, at least Not right now. Another player, though, that he brings up that might be a good option is goaltender Semyon Varlamov. Now, that might come as a surprise because Varlamov was very good for the Islanders last year, obviously up into his mid-30s now. He did sign a longer-term extension at a lower AAV a couple off seasons back. Obviously, he plans to likely, I'm sure when he made the signing, that he probably intended to kind of ride things out and retire as an Islander. But, you know, things happen and it is a business. He's got 3 years left in his contract at $2.75 million. And the way he played last year, he ended up basically being the better of the two goalies. He outplayed Sorokin and ended up having to carry the ball down the stretch and into the playoffs. He finished with a 2.6 goals against and a .918 save percentage. You could very much make an argument that he was definitely their MVP down the stretch, making the push to get into the playoffs. And if they don't have Varlamov playing at that level, it doesn't happen. I mean, Sorokin, unfortunately, had a major step back. Now, the argument here from Stefan Rosner is the guy's in his mid-30s. He has a good contract, for especially based on how he played last year. There's definitely teams out there that would like to upgrade their goaltending. The Islanders could very much use the cap space because it's the first year of the Ilya Sorokin mega 8-year extension. And to have like $11 million or more tied up in goaltending seems like a lot of dough. So, you know, does it make sense to consider moving Varlamov? Of course, he does have some trade protection in his contract, so obviously he may have to be consulted. But, you know, I'm sure that, you know, I know Lou values loyalty and respect and all that. And he'd probably work with them to try to find an agreeable solution if they did go down that road. And, you know, Rosner makes a really good argument here, being that, you know, sell high on this guy. He's probably never going to have higher value than he did this year. Going into next season, Ilya Sorokin, like I said, is the first year of an 8-year mega extension. He absolutely needs to be the starter and playing the bulk of the games. And I would suggest that because of the contract, that Patrick Waugh and the coaching staff are going to give him every opportunity to get back to form and to get back to being one of the top, you know, probably 5-6 goalies in the NHL. And if he does that, Varlamov's role will be reduced. There is no doubt. However, like I said, you know, because of that, selling high makes a lot of sense. Would Varlamov's value ever be higher than it is right now based on last year's play? Will he be able to duplicate those numbers again? Or will it be, you know, will the stats kind of come down back to earth a little bit? It's quite possible, right? So there is very much a solid argument. The other thing is that they did bring in Marcus Högberg, which was a very curious signing to bring him in from Europe. Now, the other reason for that as well is that the other goalies in the organization, like Lennox and Tikkanen, Skarek, like none of those guys are ready for a bigger role than they already have in the organization, where Högberg could be a solid, well, at least it looks like he should be able to be a solid number 3. He comes back from Europe after a stint before with Ottawa. And, you know, a little bit older, a little bit more mature, a little bit more experienced. The argument here is maybe you go with him as the backup. I was surprised, to be honest, that he signed to come back to the NHL without having a bigger role kind of assured for him. But we don't know exactly what was told, and we don't know how things go or what the plans may be behind the scenes. So there's teams out there that could benefit from Varlamov. Makes a lot of sense to me that they could take that cap space. They don't have a lot of space right now. I think it's around 50,000 or something. So when you combine that with what Varlamov is making, gets them a little bit closer to $3 million. That might be a decent player that they might be able to add to your roster, right? There's definitely some spots in your lineup that could value some upgrades. I mean, there's still the Oliver Wahlstrom outstanding contract situation. I suspect there's a good chance, or at least you would think, that Wahlstrom is going to end up being traded. If it doesn't happen here, maybe they sign him to a 1-year deal. But again, not sure cap space-wise how they can quite make that work. And then from there, if he's not traded, maybe he's moved to during training camp or something of that nature. I would think that they'd want to avoid arbitration, though, to have more flexibility with that. So we'll see what happens, but the Islanders could look to a veteran goaltender like Varlamov to free up some space. It could be a wise move to sell high because he may never have a better year than what we just saw. Now, Dave Pagnotta is reporting a couple of other situations here. One regarding the Calgary Flames. Of course, we know we saw a mass exodus out of Calgary last year, and it may not be done. Pagnotta is reporting the veteran player and top centerman for the Flames, Nazem Kadri, is definitely willing to waive his no-trade clause to be moved for the right situation. Now, we know we've heard all the comments from some of the players there before, and Kadri's a good vet, a good pro, said all the right things. I think he's prepared to be there if he needs to be. But like Pagnotta says, I do believe this to have a lot to it, that if Kadri was approached to go to a contending team that he liked and had a chance to be in a more competitive situation, maybe win another Stanley Cup, yes, he's got some term in his contract, so it's going to be a little more complicated to do, but I absolutely think that he would welcome that chance. Pagnotta mentions that he believes that he would definitely welcome an opportunity to return to the Colorado Avalanche, where he won a Stanley Cup a couple seasons back. Now, of course, the Avalanche right now also have a couple of major question marks on their roster, with Gabe Landeskog, captain, who's been out for 2 years, and Val Nichushkin, who's now in stage 3 of the NHL Player Assistance Program. Those contracts have to be accounted for right now. So a Kadri trade, if it were to happen with the Avalanche, definitely couldn't happen here right now. But if we get to training camp, and if it's determined that after giving it a try that Gabriel Landeskog is not able to return and he's definitely going to be out this year, okay, well, that changes the cap situation. So there's that. Or the other thing is Nichushkin would not be eligible to return until November. Maybe they determine once he returns that they find a new home for him. I mean, at this point, I think the team and the player are not necessarily heading towards a divorce. We can't confirm that. I think the team and his teammates want us to be supportive, but unfortunately we've seen a number of incidents now where he's had to leave the team and wasn't really there when they really needed him. And there's going to be some that make the argument that they need to move on, and there's going to probably be some that make the argument that they need to support him, and he's been a really good player when he has been there, that they need to figure out a way to make it work. So I'm not sure what direction they go in, but having those two major question marks over the franchise when they're trying to remain in a competitive window and try to win the Stanley Cup, it's a huge question mark that they're going to be possibly without 2 top 6 guys, right? We don't know. I mean, I think unfortunately the odds of Landeskog making a full return and being anywhere near the player he used to be is probably very slim. It's been 2 years. I'm not saying he can't make it back, but even if he does, will he be able to play like he did before? We don't know. And the other thing with Landeskog is, he may not. He couldn't even commit, because when he did have that press conference there running into the season and basically confirmed he's not retiring, he's still rehabbing, he's still working away, he's hoping to play next year, but couldn't even confirm 100% that he was going to go to training camp. So if he gets to training camp and then, drags on, they're going to want to give him every opportunity to be able to come back. And if they don't have the space because they've used his money in LTIR and another player, well, then that's really complicates things. So a Kadri return to the Avalanche probably is not really possible until we get to a spot where one of those guys is confirmed 100% to not be coming back. And at that point, we'll see. Or a big contract has moved out of the Avalanche to the Flames in the Kadri trade, which we don't know exactly what that would take or what the Flames would want. But Kadri's definitely open. Looking around the league, another team that definitely comes to mind that would be a great spot for him would be Carolina. There's been some talk that Carolina would like to move Kotkaniemi. We know that they obviously have some holes in their lineup with all of the UFAs they've lost. Maybe that would probably be a team that right now would be easier to make it work. Now, would Kadri go to Carolina? I can't say for certainty that he would, but all Pagnotta has confirmed is that the right situation, so an opportunity to win. We'll see. The Flames may not be done with their mass exodus there. I don't know. There doesn't seem to be a ton of interest or talk around Jonathan Huberdeau. He's not played well enough to really garner that. Nobody wants that contract. As I mentioned before, there's definitely been some teams inquiring on guys like Mackenzie Weegar and Rasmus Anderson on the back end. But at this point, we don't have any firm rumors to suggest that teams have made solidified a good enough offer to really get Calgary's attention, and that anything is really all that close at all. Now in Vancouver, we saw the Canucks sign Daniel Sprong. A little bit of a surprise signing there yesterday. Looks like it could be a really good signing. 1 year, under $1 million. He's back-to-back 40-point seasons. He has bounced around a lot, so it does beg the question. What is it about this guy that a lot of teams don't like? Clearly, it's got to be his defensive play. But if you look at how that lineup is stacked up and how it's structured right now, I wonder if they're going to consider moving a guy like Vasily Podkolzin, their first-round pick, 10th overall in 2019. I just don't really see a spot for him in that NHL lineup. With all the moves they've made, they haven't really left a good spot for him to really grab. And the guys that he's going to be fighting with have a lot more tenured contracts. So I don't know that the odds are favorable for him at all. And like I said, he only played 19 games last year while appearing in 44 American Hockey League games. I do wonder if there's maybe a team out there. This could be the type of deal we see where we see prospects of similar age, similar draft status, with similar runs so far in the NHL that need a fresh start. Can't say with certainty this is going to happen. This one is strictly just my opinion. We haven't really seen any rumors suggesting that he's on the block. But like I said, based on looking at the roster, I just can't help but think that that's something that Alvin's likely going to be working on. I just don't see a place in that lineup where that could, where he really fits. But let me know if you think Podkolzin is a trade candidate at this point or not. I mean, Höglander kind of seemed to solidify himself as one of the younger picks that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, kind of get a good spot there. And we'll see what happens with the other guys they've brought in. Clearly, like Sprong could be a 14, 15, 20 goal guy, maybe. Hard to say. Will Brock Besser score 40 goals again? Connor Garland's the other player on the right side. Ultimately, they're going to be all kind of competing for... they have more than enough players to compete for the top 6. So the third line should be pretty good too. And Podkolzin doesn't make sense to play him on the fourth line. So we'll see what happens, but I just don't know what the future holds for this guy in that organization anymore. In Montreal, I want to take a look at a couple of players. We know that we've heard a lot out of Montreal that was supposed to happen, and there's a lot that has not happened. They've been pretty quiet so far. They have not added a top young player at the draft like we were expecting them to. They haven't shed any veteran guys out like we were expecting them to. But there has been some more updates looking at some players that very well could find a move here, whether it be, into the season or maybe a little bit later. Maybe some of the Habs players that we thought might move right now seems more likely that they might end up staying, and it might be deadline moves for the coming season. Obviously, the less term on the contract, the easier players to move. And at this point, it's not expected, and teams surprise all the time, especially every year. There's always a couple of teams that really surprise us and move up in the standings. But Montreal's not really, in my opinion, and by many, expected to be a playoff team. They'll probably be a team that maybe hovers in that wildcard conversations for the first bit of the season, but over time, it's not likely. I don't know that the cards are really lining up for them to really compete for a playoff spot. So at this point, I would expect them to be sellers at the deadline again, coming at the end of the year. And if it seems like the general hope here is a guy like Yoel Armia, who I fully suspected would get moved. The hope would be that he continues off like he did last year. I mean, Armia is a player who had a tough start, ended up on waivers, went to the minors, came back, and he finished really strong. I mean, he's had his moments. He's never really been a big point producer, but he is a big body. He does have some skill. He's played an important role at times, like during the bubble playoffs when they had a good run there. He was a big part of it, obviously, but at the same time, Armia is a guy that's kind of really quieted down at stretches in his career too. But like I said, the second half of the year, after coming back after being put on waivers and all that, he did play a lot better. At this point, I thought his value might be the highest we've seen it. It's an opportunity that's almost perfect to sell high and move him along. But that has not happened. So you get to this point, hope that if it doesn't happen, which seems likely that it's not going to, that you got to hope Armia picks it up exactly where he left off. And if he doesn't, his value is going to tank again. And maybe you don't end up getting anything out of him. But at this rate, that seems like that's the approach. That's the talk here, is that Armia would be more likely to start the year in Montreal. Hopefully that he plays the way he did at the second half of last year, and then they can move him at the deadline. He may have better value. You can retain some money on his contract and kind of go from there. Now, I believe the Montreal Canadiens have a couple of salary retention spots already used. So when it comes to Armia, he could be the third one. David Savard's another player that probably will likely see his last season in Montreal. I wasn't necessarily expecting David Savard to move this offseason for sure. I thought it was possible, but not a given. Obviously, the Habs do need a couple of veteran guys on the blue line, and he's been a great veteran, good leader, and a great role model for a lot of the younger defensemen. So certainly there's not any hurry to push him out. Matheson's been pretty good there as well. We've seen some other players move on here in the last couple of years. Evanson's gone. Chris Weidman won't be back. Obviously, he's had a lot of injuries and whatnot. But obviously Savard might be there for one more year. But at the same time, the belief is that if you can only retain salary on one of these guys, you might be able to move Savard without having that be necessary. He'll have more value than Armia would. Then, with the contract difference and the fact he's a defenseman, he blocks shots, he can be a shutdown guy, all those things. So we'll see, but it's believed at this point that both these guys are likely not going to be moved, and the hope is to get better value at the deadline. I'm not sure that, I think it's risky, especially with Armia. With Savard, he's not really a guy that's, the only risk there is that he gets hurt and you can't trade him. But from an offensive standpoint, you don't have to worry about his production. Obviously, his play defensively could change. But when it comes to Armia, and you're looking at more about the offensive production and lack thereof at different points in the last year or two, I'm surprised they didn't find a way to move on and sell high. Because if he starts slow, his value is going to tank, and he probably just has to ride it out. Maybe he ends up on waivers again. Hard to say, but the Habs are hoping that these guys will be deadline moves, is what it looks like right now. In LA, I want to look at a couple of things there on The Athletic. An article from Eric Stevens did a mailbag type article, was asked about the Los Angeles Kings. If they do have a not so great season, if they do struggle, could they see them maybe selling off any veterans later in the season near the NHL trade deadline? And he talks about, of course, the three main core veteran guys, which you could now say are Kopitar, Doughty, and Phil Deneau. And makes mention that Kopitar, he believes, would have no interest in moving, that he wants to be a lifelong Los Angeles King and will finish out his contract and likely retire a King, is what the hope is there. Drew Doughty's making $11 million, has 3 years left. Stevens says he believes that the Kings would probably talk to Doughty and Deneau and see if they had any interest, as obviously if they don't, they may not really want or be able to do that, considering Doughty's making $11 million. That's going to be a really tough deal to facilitate, even if Doughty did show interest to want to get moved. But I personally have a feeling that Doughty, like Kopitar, will want to be a lifelong King. He's won there, played his entire career there, high pick. I think he's going to end up being a lifelong King myself. But Deneau is the other one who's, the more questionable player that would be easier to move. He's got 3 years left as well, more reasonable contract. Someone who can be a second, third line center. Obviously, for what he's, when you're making over $5 million, number two center is ideally what you want to be playing, because that's better value for the contract. But obviously, somebody who's a really solid two-way player would get a lot of interest. He still, has enough. Jump in his game that he could be an interesting player. Hard to say where he would go, but if the Kings do struggle, the one veteran on that team that he believes that makes the most sense that could move would be Phillip Deneau. And I think the interest would be high. He's exactly the kind of player you want for playoffs when you're adding that, shutdown centerman that, obviously somebody with a lot of experience, a lot of playoff games. He can play a solid 200-foot game, give you a little bit of offense to boot. It was real solid Montreal's run, of course, in the in the bubble. He's played well for the Los Angeles Kings since he's gone there as well. Hard to say exactly where he would go. I think there would be a lot of interest around the NHL if the Kings are out of it and they believe that he's available. I think teams would be very curious to see if they can get their hands on Danault for the last couple of years of that contract. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.